The new electoral system under consideration by Parliament at present should alarm all of us. Let me talk a little bit about why I believe that the electoral system being considered by Parliament right now is a disaster in waiting. Firstly, it is a completely new electoral system that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. By the way, this kind of electoral system, or even a version of it, doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's not what some proponents of the system, of the proposed system say. It is not a multi-member constituency system. That is a different thing. This is not a multi-member constituency system. As you know, there has been a number of very credible arguments that we have 60 or 70 or 100 multi-member constituencies. This is not multi because in a multi-member constituency, you vote for the number of members that constituency sends to Parliament. According to this system, in the Eastern Cape, there will be 63 members sent to Parliament, but you will only be able to vote for one, unless you vote for a political party. So it's a system that hasn't been tried and tested. The unintended consequences are not known, and there is no political analysis that I have seen. Nothing coming from anybody, not the government and not the majority party or any other party. The second important thing that this bill creates as a problem is proportional representation. Our Constitution says that any electoral system must result in a proportional outcome because it's a modern constitution. It's only archaic systems like in the United Kingdom where the majority can vote for one party, but a party that gets less votes can become the government. That's an archaic system. That's why our Constitution says proportional. This proposed system goes against the principle of proportional representation because what it does is that when an independent candidate in the Eastern Cape gets 500,000 votes, about 450,000 of those votes will be discarded, will be thrown away. And so proportionality means that Parliament is constituted in proportion with the will of the people, in proportion with the way in which people have voted. The third big problem is that it's a complicated system. This bill, I don't know how many of you have read the bill and read the bill is a proposed amendment to the Electoral Act, and then there are also proposed amendments to the proposed amendment bill. Here it is. Try to read it. The people who plan to vote for this bill don't understand it. The fourth point I'd like to make is that there is a principle in our system which says one person, one vote of equal value. And that's an important principle of our struggle. Because when we were fighting in the struggle for one person, one vote, P.W. Botha said, okay, let's give them all one person, one vote. The whites will vote for the white parliament, the Indians will vote for the House of Delegates, the Coloureds will vote for the House of Representatives, and the Africans will vote for this or that Bantustan. Everybody, one person, one vote. That's what he said. They argued it, they actually did argue. So in the struggle, our demand was one person, one vote of equal value. This new proposed system takes that away. Because if 50,000 people, 500,000 people in the Eastern Cape vote for Mr. X, they only get one person in Parliament. If 500,000 people vote for the EFF in the Eastern Cape, they will probably get about 8 or 9 members of Parliament in. So the principle of one person, one vote of equal value will be taken away. I cannot for the life of me see the Constitutional Court saying that this passes constitutional muster. It will be shot down by the Constitutional Court. This is a very, very dangerous situation that we are in. It's like a person driving a truck but has fallen asleep at the wheel, because you are fiddling with the most important right in our Constitution, the right to vote. I think we have a duty to point out to the public that actually the members of Parliament, by their own admission, have no idea what they're doing. There are many things about which they have no idea, but this is a serious matter. This is about the right to vote. They themselves say they have no idea what they are doing, and they should be stopped. Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome, colleagues, to this webinar on electoral reform, at least the Electoral Amendment Bill and the case for electoral reform. My name is Pamanda Mhlongo, a Senior Programs Officer here at the Democracy Development Program. And we host today's engagement in partnership with the Mail and Guardian, of course, but also in partnership with Rivonia Circle, an organization that's working to try and rebuild or at least advance greater civic action and civic participation in the electoral systems of this country in particular, but also to take power back to the people in various ways. Rivonia Circle is our partner. We're also convening this engagement with our guest speakers, Tlakhonolo Lechele, who's an electoral systems researcher at the My Vote Counts, which is an organization that's done significant work that's based in Cape Town. And then, of course, we have Mr. Mike Atkins, who's an independent elections analyst, and we'll be engaging both of them on their perspectives around what is the Electoral Amendment Bill, what was the process ahead of time, and what are the concerns that are being raised by civic society organizations and citizens alike. And so this comes after the Constitutional Court's judgment in favor of the New Nation Movement's appeal, which said that the ways in which Parliament is constituted doesn't seem to be in alignment with the spirit of the Constitution, to the extent that it forces individuals to either join or form political parties in order to try and be a part of our National Assembly in particular, which means that people who don't necessarily subscribe to the existing political parties, for instance, are either shut out, their voices are not heard, they're not adequately represented. But also it sort of undermines the ability of citizens to cast their vote in a way that they feel themselves is justifiable, free and fair in that sense. And so there's been a lot of work since that 2020 Constitutional Court judgment, and primarily that work has come from civil society and not so much from our National Assembly and Parliament and elected representatives. And so this is the final push now specifically for this Electoral Amendment Bill. And it seems as though the push is not going in the direction in which civil society wants to hear. And so to give us a first input insofar as what are the sort of repercussions / implications for accountability with the current Electoral Amendment Bill, and what are the sort of things that we should start thinking about, specifically around how how were we involved at the starting point of these conversations? Were we involved at all? To what extent does this bill represent the majority view of even those elected representatives, perhaps even at a cabinet level? Will talk us through what the Ministerial Advisor Committee is and what the work that's been undertaken and why there's these distinctions between what was a minority view and what was a majority view, and why eventually it seems as though the minority view is the one bit that's being punted quite significantly. And so let me welcome Letlokhonolo, and she'll take you through for about 15 to 20 minutes with her presentation. And of course, we do welcome any comments, any views, any perspectives in the chat section. Of course, you can also join the conversation on social media. I think that hashtag that's being punted by all civil society organizations, given what they see as a fracture in the public participation process, what is problematic about the bill is hashtag reject the bill and hashtag electoral amendment bill. And so you can join us on social media on those platforms. Of course, let me welcome again Letlokhonolo. Welcome, Letlokhonolo.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pamandla. Is my presentation on?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Pamandla, for the introduction. And thank you so much for inviting us as my vote count to just give input into this important discussion. So my name is Letlokhonolo Lilithile. I'm the electoral systems researcher at my vote counts. So I've been working closely with this bill, actually monitoring it and seeing how the process goes thus far. So my bit today will be just to provide an overview of the electoral amendment process. So with the clear focus on when it was introduced in Parliament and since then. So a bit of context to the bill and why it's important and why we're discussing it today. The public participation issues with the bill itself and sort of where things stand to today. So on the 10th of January this year, the Minister of Home Affairs introduced the Electoral Amendment Bill to the Portfolio Committee of Home Affairs. So essentially, the purpose of the bill is to amend the Electoral Act to allow for individuals to contest seats in the National Assembly and provincial legislatures as independents. So really, that's what the bill is about in a gist. But before we get there, I think it's important to provide just a bit of a context to the bill. Although, I mean, we might know that there've been, talks around electoral reform in South Africa since 1994 and also attempts. But I think for the context of this discussion, I do not have the time to go through to the historical aspects of it, but just to say in passing that before even the new nation went to court, there have been discussions around changing the electoral system to a more of a constituency-based. So there has been quite a few panels that have been set up, the Fancy Slabbert report, the Motlanthe report, and so forth. So there has been sort of an attempt, and the conversation really has been happening even before. So really, what the new nation is sort of a trigger moment, but really there is sort of a trajectory of the topic. So the Constitutional Court in 2020 ruled that it's unconstitutional that independents are not allowed to contest. So now, essentially, what Ishis Pamandla even mentioned this in his introduction, that individuals are not able to represent themselves as individuals in the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures. So the court's interpretation of this was to say that it limits their freedom of association, because as much as you have a freedom to associate, you have the same freedom to disassociate. So now it feels like that their rights were limited in a sense that you can only go to the National Assembly through party membership, but if you're out of there, you can't. So you're in essence forced to belong to a political party so that you can be an elected representative at that level and serve. So really, that was the crux of the issue. So the court said that the Electoral Act needs to be fixed so that independent candidates or individuals are able to contest at those levels without belonging to a political party. So this was in June 2020. The court ordered Parliament to fix the defects in the Electoral Act to allow for independents to contest the elections at those levels. So now, the court did not prescribe the type of system to be chosen. So they just said that it's the prerogative of Parliament, obviously, as a legislation making body, but you need to be able to ensure that independent candidates are able to contest in 2024, and that the results of the system that you are going to come up with results in general proportionality. I mean, these are the tenets of our constitution. So Parliament was given 24 months on the day of the ruling. So that this was in June 2020. So essentially, the 2 years ended in June this year. So they were given those 2 years to really come up with the electoral system that's going to include independent candidates and that they are able to contest fairly and equitably. And most importantly, the system results in general proportionality because that's the key tenet of our constitution. So then, in response to that unconstitutionality, the Minister of Home Affairs established a Ministerial Advisory Committee. This is referred to as the MEC. This was established in February 2021. So this is 6 to 7 months after the court had given the judgment. So the purpose of the committee really was to engage with stakeholders to get views on how best to change the electoral system to be able to strengthen democracy. So what we saw with this committee was that they opened up this submissions. So you had oral written submissions from civil society, independent academics, and so forth, giving their sort of insights into how to help really remedy this issue and how best we think independent candidates can be part of the electoral system and still comply to the judgment as well as comply with the constitution. So the committee compiled a report, and I think by June 21, they had finished and gave the report to the minister. But very interestingly, the report had two options. So the Ministerial Advisory Committee was made up of, I think, 7, because the IEC commissioner was recused. So now, with those 7 members, interestingly, they were unable to reconcile in terms of how best they think to include independent candidates. So they ended up having with 2 options, which they provided to the minister in that fashion with 2. So they had 2 options or 2 reports, as commonly referred in spaces. A minority report, so this was favored by the 3 of the 7, which is called the minority view. So what they had said here was that it's better that we insert independent candidates to the existing system. So there was a favor that really there's no need to change the system because it works well. What we can do is just insert independent candidates to contest at the same PR system that we have. So there's no need for legislative changes. And here, really, it's a narrow, response to the judgment, because the judgment just said you need to include independent, and didn't say how. So really, this was sort of a response to that. So there was also, but however, a second opinion or majority view. This was the 4 out of the MEC committee. They favored a hybrid system. So they had said that in order to include independent candidates to be able to contest fairly, rather let's have a hybrid of a system where we have half of the seats are calculated through PR, and then we have another half calculated through a constituency-based system. So this is similar to what we have at local government. I mean, something that we've seen. So it'll be very easy to replicate and really follow through. And it's the best way, sort of, to get to that constitutional clause that says it needs to be in general proportional. So this report was given to the minister, and then he introduced it to Parliament as the bill. So essentially, what's important to note about this bill and this process, fundamentally, it first of all, it abides to the Constitutional Court. It was a response to that. Number 2, the bill changes the electoral system. There's no way that we can include independent candidates and not change the electoral system, because political parties and independent candidates cannot logically contest in the same terrain. So, and then there will be other consequential amendments as well that follow with this change, as you will see in the discussion. So one of the things that we noted was the process, essentially how this has come about. I mean, I mentioned how it got into Parliament, but once it got into Parliament, we did notice some other issues as well, and which was around the public participation. As I said, it was introduced on the 10th of January. By February, we had Parliament, the Portfolio Committee, calling for comments, and the deadline for the comment was the 1st of February. So you can see the sort of tight deadlines for the comments for this important bill. And then the committee adopted a nationwide public participation program. This is where we saw committee members going across the country to consult the bill. So to consult comments on the bill. So overall, the committee during this process received 107 written submissions and 13 oral submissions. So really, these refer to sort of the substantive that they regard as substantive. So not every other comment was really included in the final number that you see on the slide here. So we saw some key issues in the public participation, and I think the first one was the notice. So the committee did not give the public enough time before the hearings. So the committee issued a notice on the 3rd of March saying that the bill, that hearings on the bill will comment on the 7th. So that's like a few days before. So the public participation cannot be meaningful really if people are not given enough time to study about the bill and really form their position and understand, so that they are able to give an opinion and articulate some of the concerns that they have regarding the bill. Number two, the committee expected the public to comment on a high-level report. So this is the MEC report that was given to the minister of the two options. So there was an expectation for people to express opinion, so to say that which one is better here. But I mean, there wasn't really an explanation to say this is how they differ. These are the pros and cons of the minority view. These are the pros and cons of the majority. So it was rather confusing and did not add value to the process, because now people did not engage or were not able to engage with that report. Another critical moment in the process was the political parties. So what we saw was political parties essentially busing people across the country to these particular hearings. So we had people repeating the same party position in those meetings, so essentially influencing the discussions. So this did not add value to the process, because we did not see a diversity of views that the public participation was intended to do. So so essentially the committee did not educate the public on the bill, and really the purpose of the public participation was not really clarified. So after that, so you can imagine that all of that process contributes to the condition of the bill that we currently have. So after that process, the electoral bill remained flawed, simply because the public participation was inadequate. Public participation is a very important constitutional requirement by Parliament. So although they did the public participation, but it was not meaningful, there wasn't intent, and those public participation really did not influence how the bill looked. So the minister introduced that bill that was based on a minority view, to say, I think I forgot to mention that point. Sorry. The bill was essentially based on the minority view. So although he was given the two options when he introduced the bill in Parliament, it was based on the minority view. So he came with a bill that says there's no need to change the whole electoral system to include independent candidates. We can really allow them to contest with the same existing PR. So they could have provinces as sort of regions. So really, the conditions are not really favorable for independence. But I mean, that was the bill that was introduced. Even there was not even the conditions for the vacancy. For instance, once you get a seat, if you lose the seats, that was initially how the bill was introduced. If you lose a seat, then it's done. There's no way you're going to have a by-election. The argument was that it's quite costly. So even the how you attain the votes, it's very difficult, because if you think about it, then in the National Assembly, for instance, it's 400 seats. Political parties are eligible for the 400 because they are able to contest the PR, the half, and the regional or sort of constituency. But with the independent candidates, they're only able to contest the 200. So really, the threshold that they need to meet is really not proportional, because they need a higher threshold because they've got smaller seats. So this was essentially what happens with getting using that minority view, because I mean it's not tested anyway, it's not constituency based, so it's very difficult to include. independent candidates. So that is how the bill was introduced. It has since changed a little bit, but I mean the fundamental issues still remain. So the electoral bill is flawed for those reasons and the public participation. Number two, it is flawed because the minister ignored the majority view of the MEC. I mean, I had said that there were two options, so the minister essentially went with one, and there wasn't any publication of this report to say that this was based on two options. This is the minister went with the minority, and this is why. So people don't even know that the basis of the bill that we have was based on this report and this particular view. And also, the bill contradicts the Constitutional Court's ruling. So the bill that we have results in a system that does not result in proportionality, because independent candidates require a higher threshold for a seat than political parties. They also require a higher threshold of signatures for registration. So I believe it's 20% of the quota of votes from the previous elections, where political parties, in essence, require 1,000 signatures. So there's a huge difference between the two. And if you would recall, the whole point of the Congo judgment was for independent candidates to be able to contest fairly and equitably, but these are essentially barriers to that contest because it's not leveled. So what we're also seeing with the bill and how it looks now is that the surplus votes belonging to independents are added to a pool of votes. So really, the votes are not going to be equal at the end of the day, because as an independent, you are one person. So if you require 40,000 votes for one seat, once you get double that, you can't get two seats because you are one person. So in how it's calculated, that those votes go back to the pool. Essentially, they were discarding those votes to say, you got the 40,000, you've got one seat, that's it, bye-bye. So they did not have any value. But through consultations and discussions, they are now saying that, well, we can just add that into the pool of PR, but I mean, of all the political parties and independents. So essentially that favors the PR because now political parties are able to gain more, especially those that are bigger. So, and I think Michael will be able to explain this mathematically so we get a good understanding. So, and then another critical issue was how the bill was classified, and it's going to be very important. As Pamela was saying, this is the last push, and we are hoping that we would get some sort of intervention with the classification of the bill. So, but unfortunately now we've realized that the bill is classified as a Section 75. But whereas initially it was introduced as a 76 because it affects the provinces, but now they're saying it doesn't, according to Parliament legal advice. So they've changed to a 75. So what happens with the 75, it does not concern provinces. So even when the bill goes to the NCOP, they are really not required to have that extensive public participation process so that people could engage. So we're actually hoping as civil society that we would get this sort of opportunity to engage with the NCOP as well, to really raise our concerns about these issues. But now because it's a 75, it might be slightly difficult, but we'll see how that goes. So, in closing, just to say that there are quite a bit of issues with this bill in its current format. So, there are quite big implications for Parliament if they were to pass a flawed bill. If Parliament is to adopt the flawed bill, there's a risk of constitutional challenges. Civil society will lodge applications based on the flaws of the bill. So, these are what I had just mentioned now. So we also heard that the INC said it needs 18 months to prepare for the elections. So this is what forever system that Parliament would have come up with. So they need the time. But now we are running out of time because Parliament was supposed to finish with this process in June, but they said they were not done with the bill due to issues of COVID, due to not having time to engage with the public. So they were given an extra 6 months. So that deadline ends on the 10th of December. So, but now, where will that put the IEC if they finish the process in December and the bill is still not constitutional? Because the IEC has said categorically that they need 18 months. So that's kind of the crisis that we are seeing. So this could have an impact on the 2024 elections, because if Parliament passes it a bill that's not constitutional. So I think the first thing would be a challenge against that bill to say it's not constitutional, and this would be based on that. So the Constitutional Court will be tasked with a really important cause to really try and reconcile these issues, especially because there is an upcoming election. So this is sort of a picture of where we are. I think it was yesterday that the Portfolio Committee passed the A list. So this bill has gone to the National Assembly. So the National Assembly would have to vote on the bill. And once they do that, it goes to the NCOP. And they also do their process, which includes public participation, comments, and so forth, and scrutiny of the bill, and bring it back to Parliament, and then the President is to sign. So all of this needs to happen by the 10th of December, and that this is the quality of the bill that we have. So really, this is where we are. I think I'll stop this, Pamela. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Honolo, for that quite insightful part of your presentation. I think we'll allow Mike to take us through some of the technicalities of this process before we engage in a direct Q&A. And so I want to urge our participants or delegates in the webinar to try and post as many questions as possible, so that we, by the end or the conclusion of this engagement, we would have had an opportunity to engage directly. Perhaps our public participation process might be significantly better than that of Parliament, in that we'll be able to respond to some of your concern and engage specifically with some of the elements of this process that might be a tad bit difficult for you to understand. Again, we are available on Twitter, at DDP Democracy, at Rivonia Circle, at My Vote Counts, as well as at Mike at Mike Atkins. Mike, you'll correct me about your Twitter handle. I don't seem to have it at the moment, but welcome, Mike, and we look forward to your presentation. Mike will be doing a presentation into the intricacies of the process itself, and so it will be quite insightful over the next 20 to 25 minutes for initial input, and then of course we'll have an opportunity a bit later on to engage directly with your Q&A, but also to develop further some of the most specific issues that Mike has analyzed with the framing of the bill, but also the work that needs to be done in order to try and correct what the bill puts in our space. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. We tend to take elections for granted. There is a tendency to assume, for example, that election results are accurate. You know, that the counting is done correctly, the tallying, the results are checked. We tend to assume that the people who know about these things just get on and do them. And when it comes to an electoral system and choosing a new system, we tend to assume that the people who know about that stuff, that they're not going to make a major blunder. And this is part of the problem that we face at the moment. We have this disparity between the parliamentary committee and the minister and all of their advisors. On the one hand, proceeding with the bill, it's been certified as constitutional by the state law advisor, and everything is proceeding as though it is normal and there is nothing untoward. And yet we have some of us and civil society saying, no, it's not. Vali Musa, in that clip in the beginning, had some very strong words to say about the constitutionality of the bill. So I want to try and unpack how we can have such a great divide between those working on the bill, drafting and amending it and approving it, and those of us on the sidelines saying, no, this is not right. Now, there is an old saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I'm hoping in very brief form today to give you some of that evidence to support the claims that are being made. There are a lot of sort of written materials which we will provide links to, where you can look at some of the more detailed in-depth analyses. And I have to warn that it is quite heavy reading. Now, the first extraordinary claim that we make is it is not possible to hold a constitutionally compliant election involving individuals as opposed to parties without having separate constituency elections and PR elections along the lines of our local government system. Now, there are a few options available, but the fundamental assertion is that it is not possible to meet our constitutional requirements of proportionality unless we have these separate ballots for constituencies and for proportional representations where only parties are involved in the PR election. The second claim, which is a rather inconvenient one for those involved in the process, and this is the claim that we would like everybody to interrogate and test, but the claim being made is that the current bill has no prospect of being constitutional, of being fixed, of being tweaked or made to be okay. The assertion is the structure of the bill makes it impossible for this bill to be constitutional. The follow-on for that is again a fairly startling claim. We are already in a constitutional crisis. It is now not possible to hold a constitutionally compliant election in 2024, no matter what we do from here. And the claim is that we are going to have the least worst system in place for 2024 in terms of fairness and constitutionality. I hope I can provide some basis for these claims and inspire people to look further at the details. So I'm going to try and share my screen here and share screen. Sorry about this. All right, share. Right, so can I confirm that you can see my presentation on the screen? Can you just, somebody give me an indication
yes, Mike,
that you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm provocatively calling this a constitutional disaster zone. The first thing that I would like to draw attention to is a document presented to the Home Affairs Committee in August of 2020, a few weeks after the Constitutional Court judgment. And this is the timelines required for Parliament to pass a bill with constituencies to allow enough time afterwards for preparation for the 2024 elections. So in 2020, in August, Parliament was presented with a very detailed timeline. If I can just zoom in a little bit. The key of this timeline is that the drafting of this bill was due to begin in August 2020 and conclude in September. And then they have a very finely worked out timeline with a whole lot of different steps to meet the June 2020 deadline. This was also premised on the idea that it was going to be, if this was a constituency system, they did work out alternate timelines which were not quite as frantic. But the Home Affairs Committee and the Minister of Home Affairs knew in August 2020 that they had to commence work immediately. But we know that they didn't. The Ministerial Advisory Committee was convened in February, March 2021. It reported in June 2021. It was responded to and action was taken in October 2021. And in that MAC report, there was indeed a constituency system proposed. And then there was that so-called minority option that attempted to create this minimalist change. By October 2021, it was impossible to have constituencies ready for the 2024 election. The deadline had already come and gone because Parliament did not begin in August 2020. So this is, in my best understanding, where we went wrong in the whole process. By the time the minister was choosing an option from that MAC report, he did not have time to choose a constituency system as the majority of the members of the MAC proposed. So I'm going to go. Can you see the spreadsheet on my screen now? Sorry, can you just confirm that the spreadsheet is visible on the screen?
Yes, we can, Mike.
Great, thank you. Right, so what I would like to do is I'd like to very briefly tell you about how a PR system works and what happens with independent candidates. I'm going to go quickly. These materials will all be available afterwards. Essentially, you get a whole lot of parties with votes. You can see them here. You get a total number of votes. This is a scenario from the based on 2019 data for the Limpopo Provincial Legislature. There's 49 seats, and there 29,000 is a number of votes per seat. Each party then gets allocated a number of quota seats. How many blocks, complete blocks of 29,000 do they have in their total? So at 69,000, there are 2 quota seats. After the quota seats are allocated, there are, for example, 5 remainder seats to be allocated. So they just take how many votes are left over for each party, and the highest leftover vote gets a seat up to the first 5. That's great. Now I want to show you a little thing about the numbers. The key is the quota, and most people don't dive into the mechanics of seat allocations. I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to take that quota and I'm going to override it. I'm going to call the quota. Now, just by the way, observe in this, the ANC gets 33 seats on quota, 1 on remainder, so they have 34 of the 49 seats. So I'm going to change the quota to 26,000. Immediately, the ANC gets 37 seats. Now, 49 seats are allocated. I change the quota, and suddenly the ANC gets a bonus of 3 seats. But it's very simple, because the quota is the cost in votes of each seat. If you drop the quota, the cost of each seat drops. And so the party that has already purchased the most number of seats, as in they have the most number of seats allocated on quota, the price of those 33 seats goes down by if the quota drops. So hence they get more seats for their money, or more seats for their votes. And most people don't realize that when you adjust the quota in a PR calculation, you advantage the largest party. Now, quickly in this scenario, I have a couple of hypothetical independent candidates, and we note that 2 of them get 2 seats. Now, obviously, the point is an independent can't get 2 seats. So we have a secondary process where 2 of them have to lose a seat. And then any independents who have seats, that aren't going to count, they get removed. So what happens is, instead of the 5 seats that independents get on just raw calculation, 3 are reserved for them. So now 46 seats are now recalculated. And that's fine. And the 3 independents get their seats. But what we see is the quota over here is 29,000, the original. But on the recalculation, when we take all of those votes cast for independents out, the quota is 27,000 and something. So now on that initial allocation, the ANC gets 35, not 33 seats on that initial allocation. So then on remainder, the ANC is going to get a further seat, and the ANC lands up with 36 seats instead of the 34 that they would have had in a normal PR election on the same number of votes. Because you see, of those 2 seats that the independents couldn't take up, the 2 that had to be forfeited here, as it happened, because of the recalculation system chosen for this bill, the largest party, because the quota goes down, the largest party always gets first bite at those extra seats. They will always benefit the most. Now, I'm sorry, it's a lot of numbers, it's difficult, and I'm not expecting necessarily that you pick this up. The fact remains, though, if I can go back to my presentation, the fact remains, when you cast a vote for an independent candidate, that vote in the end gets removed from the calculation and a recalculation is done. So if twice as many people as needed for a seat vote for an independent candidate, then effectively half of those votes are discarded. Or you could say half of each person's vote is discarded. When you discard a fraction of each person's vote, the trouble is numerically that is the same as dishing those votes out to the existing parties, with the largest party being first in the queue for those votes because they've got the most seats. So what we have, it is an undeniable fact. Under this bill, every single vote cast in favor of an independent candidate will impart a fraction of that vote, will contribute to seats that are gained by the largest party in that election. Now, there are some mitigations. There are changes that have been proposed by the IEC. There are some improvements to the bill from January. But those fundamental facts remain. And as Valimusa said at the beginning, each vote must count equally. And this structure of having an individual on the same ballot paper as a party in a PR election, it is actually a contradiction in terms. But that problem is what creates these distortions and imbalances that we are going to do. So what I'd like to do very quickly, and I will skip through some of my slides, the full submissions and presentation are available. So if we are to evaluate constitutionality of any electoral system, well, the first thing is Section 9 of the Constitution, equality before the law. Are independent candidates treated the same as those contesting as political parties? Fair elections. Is the election fair? Now, when you have fair elections, you consider both the person who wants to be elected and the perspective of the individual voter, although I'll come to that. The third requirement is sections 46 and 105 of the Constitution, that the electoral system must result, in general, in proportional representation. And the in general is being used at the moment to say it doesn't matter what disproportionality we have, that is a get out of jail card for the proponents of the bill. In terms of constitution as well, we must look, as I said, from the perspectives of parties and of independent candidates. We must look at the seat allocation of legislatures in the National Assembly, and we must look from the perspective of the voters. What is the effect of my vote? And the person who votes for a small party in the current system and that party gains no seats is definitely being treated by the person who votes for an independent candidate and whose vote is wasted. We won't go into the details, but those two scenarios are not the same at all. Right, so the faults in the bill. And as I said, documents are available. National Assembly, Little Noho mentioned this, there is already there is a high threshold. Because 200 seats are available to independent candidates for the entire quantum of votes, the effective quota where the independent candidates calculations are done is generally nearly double that for political parties in the overall calculation. There are 9 separate regions, and so the quota for independent candidates ranges between 68 and 92,000 votes, as opposed to the approximately 44,000 votes for an independent candidate. There is a small mitigation of this, but the details don't matter. This is a fundamental problem that is very difficult to get around. The second problem, like local government, and I'm arguing that this is invalid and unconstitutional, the overall PR balance in the National Assembly, there are now 2 ballots for the National Assembly. You vote in your region with independents, you vote for the whole National Assembly as a PR ballot. The 2 ballots are combined for the PR calculations. So essentially, each region has those distortions that I was trying to show you of the individuals being on the same ballot as the PR. By combining the 2 ballots, the distortions in the regions are imported into the overall calculation. This creates a seat bonus to the largest party. It's an undeniable fact. A very brief illustration, the details don't matter. In green is if the National Assembly was calculated only in terms of PR, it is a scenario that I included in my submission to Parliament. But in that scenario, on the PR ballot, the ANC gets 50% of the votes, but more 51. But 20 seats were given to independent candidates in the scenario. So the ANC then would deserve effectively half of the 380 seats available to parties directly. In the scenario, the ANC would get 195 seats, which is slightly more than that. It's a very proportional outcome. But if the two ballots are combined, so my red block on the right, in that scenario with the same ballots, exactly the same numerical scenario, the ANC gets 53% of the seats, or 203 seats, but they only have 49% of the votes going towards those seats. It is possible, with a minority of the overall votes cast, by combining these two ballots, for a party to have a minority of the overall votes and a majority of the seats. It is a simple fact. It is an undeniable, unavoidable consequence of the bill. But I need to go through quickly. In provincial legislatures, independents and parties are on the same ballot. There's one legislature, one ballot. There's no constituency. There's no sub-election below the level of a province where you can have independents contesting with an overall PR for the whole province. Independents and parties are on the same PR ballot. And as I said, in terms of election theory, this is a contradiction in terms, because an independent can get only one seat. This creates a built-in seat bonus for the largest party. Here is a little example, and it's in my submission. I chose a legislature. In that example, the ANC gets, this would be the, also the Limpopo, in one of my scenarios with Limpopo. The ANC would get 33 seats proportionally in terms of their share of the votes. Their preliminary allocation in terms of the bill would be 34 seats. When excess votes for, and this is very similar to the scenario I showed you earlier, the intermediate allocation would be 35 seats, so they've gone from 33 to 35. And if an independent candidate also wins a seat in the National Assembly and elects not to take their seat in this legislature, the final allocation would be 36 seats. So in effect, the ANC would gain 3 seats above their proportional share of the vote. Right, filling vacancies, we'll go quickly. There is a recalculation, a complicated recalculation done. This recalculation has a numerical bias because it changes the quota. When it changes the quota, it biases in favor of the largest party. It's an undeniable fact. It's unequivocal. The alternate proposed was that, well, the next remainder on the original list would simply apply if a vacancy has to be filled, if an independent leaves the legislature. Right, contesting multiple elections. An independent candidate may stand in several different regions for the National Assembly or in a provincial legislature, but they can only be elected in one. The fundamental problem is the voters are disenfranchised. So if a prominent person, and if I may use take 2 polar opposite candidates, Steve Hofmeyr and Thuli Madonsela, each stand for elections. They each gain seats in Gauteng and they each gain seats in the Western Cape. Well, they can obviously only take up one of those. So they then get allocated a seat in one place. And effectively, all of the voters in the other region who voted for them, their votes are scrapped. They are disenfranchised. It's a fundamental fact. And the mechanism of scrapping that involves a recalculation which lowers the quota, which benefits the largest party. So those votes would then go to the largest parties instead of to an independent candidate. Now, if Thuli Madonsela stood only in Gauteng, or if the voters in the Western Cape knew that she was going to get elected in Gauteng, they would then have chosen perhaps to vote for a different independent candidate who maybe doesn't get elected at first, but if Thuli Madonsela's supporters in the Western Cape vote for that other independent candidate, well, that person could also get elected instead of the party that gains as a result of the recalculation. So as I mentioned, bonus seats to the largest party. It is incomprehensible that we make rules supposedly to give rights to the actual independent candidates where we take away rights from voters. To my mind, that is incomprehensible. Right, it's been mentioned there's a signature requirement. Parties require 1,000 signatures once. Independent candidates require 8,000 plus. There's some variation depending on the size of the region. Parliament, the committee has not budged on this. They've reduced the figures, but they've not budged. To my mind, it is an absurdity. And those 8,000 plus signatures, the independent candidate has to submit names and ID numbers electronically to the IEC, which is an excessive burden. I don't need to dwell on that. There are a couple of logic and drafting errors. The quota for signatures, and this I don't need to dwell on it, but the actual quota, I mentioned a figure of 8,000 plus. The actual figure, according to how the bill is drafted, is between 13 and 18,000 for the National Assembly. The committee does not realize, they think it's the 9,000 that they're talking about. They talk about a 20% of quota. I included this point in a letter to the IEC during August. I included it in my submission to Parliament in September. It's been discussed briefly in the committee. Nobody has paid attention. And there is a small drafting error that was raised in yesterday's committee meeting by Adrian Roos of the DA. The IEC and state law advisor made a what do we call it, a change. That change doesn't work well. Right, so my laptop, one of my computers is going to die quite soon, so I might be constrained in my presentation, but I can carry on talking if the PowerPoint disappears. The IEC has given a detailed feedback to the committee. In particular, the IEC has explicitly rebutted a number of claims that I make in my submission. I don't want to dwell on these. I can give an example. So in response to my concerns about overall proportionality, the IEC says, they make this statement, proportionality increases if you have a low threshold. That doesn't apply here. If you increase the district magnitude, so if you have bigger electoral districts, and if your electoral formula is proportional, you get better proportionality. They say that our South African system is the most proportional almost in the world. The trouble is their statements to the parliamentary committee are true for our old electoral system. They are not true under the bill. Under the bill, the electoral formula chosen decreases proportionality. The larger district size in terms of the bill, where individuals are on the same ballot as parties, decreases proportionality. I have to call this that the IEC has misadvised the parliamentary committee. And this is critically important because the committee relies on their input. The IEC talks about bias. I talk about bias in favor of the largest party. They say, oh, but a proportional system automatically rewards the largest parties. They misrepresent the claim made in the submission. They confuse general proportional reward with the disproportional award caused by the seat allocation in the bill. They also do not substantiate their claim that the numerical examples presented are extreme. Now, there are a few more of these, and I won't go into the details if I can just skip through. This material, the presentation, will be available. I know time is going out. With the answer to the multiple elections, they don't even attempt to rebut the argument. They say the argument is mathematically correct, but then they just go and assert that there's no violation of the principle of proportionality with no attempted explanation. Right. The filling the vacancies, I won't go into that. Why has this all gone wrong? Why do we have this great disjuncture between what civil society is saying and what the submissions are saying and what the parliamentary committee and what the IEC and other advisors are saying? The root problems. There was that delay after August 2020. Because of that delay, there was actually only one option on the table. So the simplest explanation is the minister chose the only viable option to get an election before 2024. There has been no consideration of proportionality in the bill, in all the analysis. I am almost certain that the state law advisor in certifying the constitutionality of the bill did not apply their minds to the question of proportionality. There has been an absence of modeling the outcomes of the bill, of testing the outcomes of the bill. As each change is made, I've quickly gone to my spreadsheets and I have looked at what happens when you implement the system. And I'm saying the IEC has not done this, the Department of Home Affairs has not done this. There has been the failure to treat the electoral system as a system. When you make a change in one area, you create a problem in another. And often changes have been made over the months, and there hasn't been consideration of what happens when the other system, the other part of the system changes. And we would argue that there has been a failure to properly engage submissions made. And the quality of advice, this has to be said as an objective assertion, the quality of advice given to the committee has not been good enough. And this is why the committee is proceeding on the assumption that everything is okay. And there are those of us on the sidelines saying it is not okay. So thank you. I've probably gone over my time. These are my contact details, Spamandla, at AtkinsMike1, my Twitter handle. And I have created a simple blog site, electionmatters.org.za. It is very raw and new, but I have a page with links to my submissions to Parliament, and I will upload a number of other documents over the coming hours to add to that site. So thank you very much, and maybe we can go to some questions now.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much for that very detailed presentation of some of the, especially when you look at the calculation of seats. It would be interesting to engage specifically with parliamentarians. Of course, part of the challenge with the with asking Parliament or National Assembly as it's currently constituted is we're asking them to sort of work out a process that essentially at some point might get them out of pocket, as it were. So I'd like to engage now with some of the question and answers that we have from the session itself. And one of the questions that reads, and I think Letlhogonolo will be able to then respond as she has in part. There's a question from Munontobeko Mhlongo that says, is the country only attempting to amend the electoral system to allow independent candidates for provincial elections only? Are we not looking at allowing individuals to contest in the presidential election? She says that she knows that this is not specific to this bill, but if we are calling for the bill to go back to the drawing board, can we just not tackle all of it at once? Letlhogonolo, if you might come in and give us your feedback in relation to this comment in particular. Does the Electoral Amendment Bill have an impact on who becomes the president of this country? To what extent does my vote for an independent candidate have the likelihood of engaging with engaging with the cabinet appointments and so forth? Maybe to just add another question that we'll try and engage Mike in here as well. If the IEC as an institution if the IEC as an institution we trust to analyze and mold how Parliament amends the electoral reform, is one misleading the affiliated parliamentary committee? Who can the public turn to, and how would class action work? Perhaps given the success of MVC in taking some of these issues to court, you might be able to give us some insight into that as well, Letrokono.
All right, thank you so much, Pamandla. I tried to answer the question in the chat box, but it's okay. The electoral amendment is for both the National Assembly and the Provincial Legislatures. So the Act is supposed to be amended to allow for individuals to be able to contest at those levels. So it's a really narrow judgment, but the nice thing about it was that the court did not prescribe the type of system that we come up with. I mean, yes, it's not even in their territory. So Parliament was given free rein in how they are going to include. So the idea was that as long as we have those independent candidates, and then the system is fair and equitable and meets those constitutional requirements. So really, it's narrow in that sense. It's about that. But however, there was an opportunity to change the electoral system in a sense that it could be a hybrid, where other seats are contested through a constituency-based system, depending on the format, and the other into a PR. But however, in terms of electing the president, I know Chief Justice Zondo in his recommendation said something to that effect, but that's not really a possibility at the moment. It's not what's been tabled. We use a parliamentary system, so we vote for people to represent us in the National Assembly, and those people make decisions on our behalf. So they are the ones that vote for the president and not us. So if we were to vote for the president directly, it would be, we need to change the constitution to a presidential system where we vote for the president directly. So I mean, that has its pros and cons, as much as our parliamentary system has its pros and cons. So really, that's not what's on the table. There was a question about how we go about this. Yeah, I mean, the process has come and gone, and Mike had really mentioned the delays, and which is the crux of the problem. But I mean, the only option that we have, unfortunately, is legal action. We need to, once the bill is passed, once the president signs into law, we would have to go to the Concord to challenge the bill on those issues of constitutionality. I mean, they are serious issues, proportionality, and how voters are enfranchised. I mean, that's the most important people after all. So that would be coming up with a legal argument to contest that, because another issue is that the system that we have now, it's invalid because it was declared invalid in 2020. So the Concord would have that huge task to reconcile what do we do, because we can't use the same system. We can't postpone the election. There's a precedent. We were not able to do that last year when we had the local government election. So really, this is a huge task for the courts to kind of reconcile free and fair elections and the Constitution.
I think what becomes interesting for me, at least, is to what extent then can we rely on the president to do the right thing? I think part of the work of civil society is to try and put as much pressure on the president to not even sign it to law, to refer it straight to the Constitutional Court, to see whether it has the sort of necessary constitutional muster. But of course, I think a comment was made at the recent press briefing with the Defend Our Democracy and other organizations that perhaps the elective conference of the ANC might be too close for the president to do the quote-unquote the right thing. Mike, perhaps if we can go to you, based on your feedback around what the IEC itself as an institution was doing. The question from Lerato comes in quite interestingly in terms of if there's a sense that they might be misleading the parliamentary process or the parliamentary committee that's meant to be amending this bill or meant to be working through this bill. Who can we as the public then turn to? In terms of your work as an independent electoral analyst, what are some of the stakeholders that you've started to engage with, and what is the work that you envision over the next 2 months or so?
If I may just comment about the IEC. The IEC is a highly professional organization who have successfully conducted elections for many years now, often in very difficult and trying circumstances. I can also say that they have worked very hard through the whole of this year on the bill, and they have made a number of very important contributions and additions and amendments to the bill. And it is a result of their inputs over the months with the committee that the improvements to the bill that have been made have actually happened. That has come from the IEC. I am making the claim that in critical respects of the analysis of proportionality, the numerical analysis, I am making the claim that the IEC's advice to the committee has not been accurate. They were very gracious to entertain submissions by myself and certain civil society organizations in July. I have corresponded with the IEC during August, and there has been a fair amount of correspondence, and they have obviously worked very hard on this. I would not like to speculate as to why or how this disparity of view has come about. I'm simply saying the issue is important enough that the objective claims need to be verified. And if I can make one statement, the IEC has not successfully rebutted the submissions that a number of people have made to the committee about the constitutional problems with the bill. So the analysis, the engagement, it would be better if we had more engagement. We all benefit if we can work with and engage the IEC rather than just sitting on the sidelines and taking potshots, and that is never the intention. But in terms of what we can do now, in a sense, it is out of their hands. I believe it would be good for the civil society groups with concerns to have solid working meetings with the IEC to thrash out the actual numerical details and the numerical distortions. You know, claims were made that some of the numerical examples represent extreme cases, but I'm saying that's not the case. And it would be very easy for us to sit down with the IEC or with the committee and say, actually, no, these are not extreme. These are perfectly viable scenarios that you're not allowing for. But what must happen now is exactly the thing of it's going to the NCOP after passing in Parliament, presumably in 2 weeks. Then it would be good if some of the civil society bodies with a bit of clout approach the Office of the Presidency, and it would be fantastic if staff and legal counsel for the President's office were able to sit down with the details and look at the examples, look at the principles involved. Again, Vali Musa said it at the beginning, votes must count equally. That is what the struggle was about. That is what democracy is about. And I believe that collectively we can show the president or his people that this bill does not meet that requirement, that each vote counts equally. And so on objective grounds, I think public awareness will help to bring this to the attention of the presidency. And I think that approaches need to be made. And we'll have to see what happens from that point forward. Ideally, the president refers it back to Parliament, and if it is still not satisfactory, the president can then refer it to the Constitutional Court. That would be the quickest and most efficient route for these claims to be tested objectively. Nobody is saying we don't like this, we want to shout and cause trouble. Civil society is saying we have real concerns based on the numbers, based on the principles of fairness. And when we say it's unconstitutional, that's not an academic principle. It is an unfairness to voters. Voters' votes will not count the same. And those things cannot be lightly brushed aside. So hopefully, yes, the presidency does take note, and this is where civil society plays a role. And hopefully that efficient route to the Constitutional Court gets this heard and evaluated as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much, Mike. Perhaps if I can bring both you and Tlogonolo in on a very, so two things. One, If you don't mind me being a bit provocative. So what if then the response from Parliament, political parties, and other political actors says, look at who constitutes the ones who are making the loudest noise around this issue as agent provocateurs, people who are not friends of the ANC, who are not friendly to the ANC, and therefore this is the sort of a last ditch attempt to try and push out the ANC through mechanisms that are not necessarily democratic. Let me put it like that, because that you'll hear, for instance, on Twitter and other spaces that NGOs and civil society in particular are sometimes spoken about in terms that they start talking about who's funding this operation. And so what are the things that we can do to reassure citizens that our work is not to try and diminish the quality of their enfranchisement? So their voice still remains their voice. Their vote still remains their vote. We just want to be able to offer options, broaden the spectrum, but also to be compliant to the very constitution that we fought hard over. So that's one to you, Letlakonolo. To Mike, after Letlakonolo is concluded, the question then, given that we are not fond of the bill in its current form, not even not fond, but the bill in its current form is problematic, and then the process of, firstly, for the presidency to refer back to Parliament and then refer to the Constitutional Court / civil society just taking the signed act into to be challenged at the Constitutional Court, that introduces significant strains on the electoral cycle's timelines. What is your view then of the work that needs to be undertaken in order to ensure that come 2024, that we still have, will we still have opportunity to have an election given the length of some of these legal processes? If we do you think it's going to have the necessary quality, given that there would still be a lot of things sort of hanging in the balance? And if we don't, what is the impact then on public trust in the various institutions that are meant to be delivering a free and fair election? I know that's quite chunky, but let me allow the Shokono to start, and then we'll come to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Pa. That's a very political question. But just to start to say that, I mean, electoral reform was inevitable. Since 1994, there was sort of an attempt to change the electoral system. So it was a matter of opportunity. As I had said initially, that there has been attempts with the panel. So really, what the New Nation movement case did was just a trigger, and hence it was just as an opportunity to change the system. But really, we're not getting that. So, in terms of political parties in Parliament, I mean, that's the thing. The people who are working on this bill are the people who belong to political parties, essentially. And what we're seeing in Parliament is them exercising their party position. One would say there might be issues of self-preservation, because now you're essentially asking them to draft a system that would sort of make them not be equal in the political field, in the sense that once you have independent candidate, it changes the balance of power. There's other people coming in, there's lesser seats for you. So you imagine if you are, that MP, you are tasked with this, trying to come up with a system, and at the same time trying to make sure that you are on top, and then you are required to include independent candidates. I mean, so that's really what's happening with that. But then it's not supposed to be that way, because the Concord rule that you need to include independent candidates and you need to include them in a fair and equitable manner. That's exactly where we are. So what was there for them to do was to do exactly that. They are there on behalf of us as the people. We vote for them to take those decisions on our behalf. So they were supposed to execute that. So not really putting themselves before the Constitution, which is what we are seeing now. I think that's why the problems come in terms of political parties trying to preserve themselves over the Constitution more than anything. Was there another follow-up question? I think I'm forgetting.
As civil society, then, for us to also embolden the public trust, the sentiment around our role as civil society organizations, why are we the ones who have the capacity and ability to bring this to the public awareness, but also to do the work of advocacy on behalf of the public?
I mean, that's the thing, especially with regards to Parliament. They work on these bills, and there in their own, YouTube meetings and stuff. So people never get to get a sense of what's happening and how decision making happens. You only hear about a bill if it's of public interest, or you only hear about it 2-3 days before. So organizations like ourselves really try and get that message to the people so that they are able to really to participate and influence, these changes. And that's what we tried to do with the bill. So ever since it was introduced, we tried to say, I remember doing a summary of the bill when it was first introduced, to say this is how it looks, this is what's happening. So really, that's an objective view of the bill. So really, look, if you think about it this way, it's the Constitution, and that's what we are guided by. So what we think is that the bill does not meet the Constitution, not that it does not meet our interests and preferences. So we are trying to make sure that Parliament is able to reconcile, so for the benefit of all, which is very important, which is what we follow. So really, it's not about our interest to say, but that people are part of it. So we need the legitimacy from people as well to be able to support, especially with the pressure, applying pressure to the president not to sign on this. Obviously, we need people to have a good understanding of this, what it stands for. So it's very important for people to be really part of this important work. So, because it's an important change in the system. So think about it: when you go to vote in 2024, it will be quite different. You'd have 3 ballots. There will be independent candidates. So it changes the whole. So people are just going to go there not knowing the changes and how they affect them. So it's very good for them to know before, so that really we have legitimate elections, because people would have known the process and would have known why they're voting for and how much their vote is really worth. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lithokonolo. I think that's very important. We're trying to reconcile the constitutional process. This is no one's interest specifically, but it's in everyone's interest at the same time. So, Mike, your comment on the timelines, the effect on the timelines, and essentially what the work looks like.
Yes, I would argue we are already in a mess. It's already happened. And because the deadlines for implementing a constituency system were not met, that we were in a mess a year ago. But let's look, we need to be very careful that we don't land up in an absolute mess. So let's take the worst case scenario. The bill gets passed, it gets signed, nobody challenges it in the Constitutional Court, the systems get implemented, election 2024 is held, and then somebody challenges the fairness and constitutionality of the election after the election. That is near meltdown status. The political and social instability that could arise from contested elections would be nightmare territory. This is like the proverbial attack of the zombies in terms of what could go wrong in society. So I'm assuming we're not going to meet that worst case scenario. But let's look at another key fact. Let's say the president does sign the bill on December the 10th. Then the IEC is duty bound to commence building new electoral systems that accommodate independent candidates, the registration of candidates, the seat allocation systems, everything to do with elections. They start building new systems, which will take them the better part of next year. So a constitutional court challenge maybe gets lodged in January, paperwork is exchanged, affidavits go backwards and forwards. And I don't know the timelines, but maybe there is a hearing in May of next year in the Constitutional Court. And maybe there is a judgment in June, July of next year in the Constitutional Court. And that judgment is, this new act is unconstitutional. Well, the IEC would then have spent 7 months developing a system which is unconstitutional. Now, on a practical thing, and in terms of the real meltdown is that we can't have elections at all. And we came close to that scenario last year with the local government elections and COVID and the Constitutional Court. But the court was very firm. The election must go ahead. The IEC must sort of get down to work and get things done. And they did. The IEC did an incredibly good job, despite the difficulties, to get an election at the end of last year. So the scenario is, the backup scenario is, if the Constitutional Court rules that the new act is unconstitutional, at least the IEC still has the existing electoral system. So in the second half of next year, they would still be able to conduct an election by August 2024 in terms of the old system. But oh dear, the old system is unconstitutional. So logically, the options on the table are, we do have an election in terms of the old system, or and I'm working on the assumption that the new system will be found to be unconstitutional. Then we would have to have potentially, and this is a very big hypothetical, some kind of hybrid compromise where the distortions and the unfairness of the new system can be minimized while still accommodating independent candidates to some extent. It is not certain that such compromise can be reached. And there's a lot of discussion on that scenario going. Now, if that compromise happens, well, the systems for the election could still be used. The new systems that get developed by the IEC over those months could still be used. The differences, the compromises, would be in the seat allocation processes, and that would be apart from the candidates and the nominations and all of those initial processes. So it could be very tricky. It could be a nightmare to unpick. But in principle, if there is some form of compromise position as a once-off for 2024, because we've made the claim that this bill cannot be rescued in terms of its overall constitutionality. If the Constitutional Court can find a way to overlook some of the flaws of this current bill and conduct an election that is fair enough in 2024, then it would be very challenging. The IEC and the commissioners and the senior staff went through nightmares last year, and they would go through fresh nightmares again. My considered view is that it would be doable. But of course, if we're getting a Concord ruling any later than July or August next year, then we're into quite murky territory in terms of holding an election. And then it may be that the only way to hold an election is in terms of the old system. But this has to be resolved by the end of 2023. If we go into 2024 without this resolved, we are then looking at meltdown scenarios. And the Concord is very firm. The election has to be held within the deadline. So this is why some of us are saying, we've been urging the committee to grasp the nettle, and we'll urge the National Assembly to grasp the nettle and say, don't pass an unconstitutional bill. And the same will be said to the NCOP, and the same will be said to the presidency. So if this gets to the Constitutional Court in January, February, rather than May, that gives us a bit of breathing space. And the court, in my opinion, is going to have a terrible knot to untangle. Anyone ever get their headphones tangled up and find it tricky to untangle them? The knot that the Concord will have to untangle is going to be worse than that, to try and accommodate independent candidates while still having a sufficiently free and fair election. So it is a slightly doom and gloom outlook. And the phrase that one could perhaps use is that we are sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis. Mm. So I wish I had better news, but one has to call it as one sees it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Perhaps then to take it to the final sort of 10 minutes each in closing, or towards the close, then what's the work going forward? And I target specifically the three sort of constituencies that we work with quite largely in our space. So it's individual citizens, me, Uncle Tom, Ucheri sitting at home. What is their work? What is the work of civil society, the organizations like MVC or Defend Our Democracies, etc. And then what's the work that you would advise of National Assembly? Let me start with you, Tlokonolo, and then we'll come to Bono or Mike hereafter.
Thanks, Pa. As Mike said, I mean, yeah, it's quite crunch time because the bill has to be signed by the 10th of December. So that leaves us with a few days. But what we've been doing as civil society is trying to do activation programs across the country, and trying to inform people about this important bill. So we've been having sort of workshops across the country, East London, Cape Town, Joburg. So we have come together as civil society, have gotten interested in this matter. So so all of us are having sort of different activities in different, provinces and cities. So although maybe we might have differences in terms of the position, but I mean ultimately we all agree that the bill is quite flawed. So that's really the standpoint. So for the public, really, I think they just need to be able to follow and really back us up with the course that we're taking. It's really a complex matter, and I've noticed that when you speak to people, they really don't know about it. So we have this challenges of society trying to explain this matter to umalume, like you were saying, to be able to help us with this. So essentially, we have those interventions that are left. The National Assembly is going to sit and vote on this. So there has been some work around trying to engage the elected representative in that house to say you cannot vote on this bill. These are the issues, because ultimately those people represent us. So we need to be able to have rapport and be able to speak to them and say these are our issues. This is how we think we should vote. So there's that intervention as well as the NCOP process. So they are supposed to do a process similar to what Parliament did to engage with their constituencies, speak to people about the bill. So that's also a sort of intervention for us to be able to attend those meetings, to raise the same issues that we've been raising all along, to say this bill is flawed. So that's also a good enough opportunity for us to do that. And the other is obviously with the president before he signs the bill. That's a rather tricky one, but I think we can be able to influence, especially with the mass population around behind us saying that this is flawed. I think we'll be able to listen to the people, if there's many of us, because we're trying to just avoid that whole constitutional court battle and everything that's going to happen in January. So as Mike is saying, we're really running out of time, especially if it goes on to 2024. So we need to get a better sense come early next year where we headed. Thanks, Pa.
Thank you very much, Tlokonolo. Mike, your additional sort of inputs for about 10 minutes.
Yes, I would like to put a perhaps unusual, or I don't like the word controversial, but I'd like to put a creative suggestion forward, that apart from the broad awareness that needs to take place, that a small working group from the civil society groups and those of us that have done the analysis of the proportionality, that if we get a small working group to have a working engagement with the IEC specifically, with the state law advisor, with parliamentary legal services, those involved in assessing the validity and viability of this bill. Even as the parliamentary process has to go forward, we can't suddenly just pull a plug. We understand that that process needs to go forward. But in the meantime, if we could have an in-depth working engagement with the IEC, because their advice has been critical to the committee's decisions, and we can hammer out those details, where numerical examples are viewed as extreme, we can show that they're not, or they can prove that they are. So it's an objective process where we have a backwards and forwards, rather than one document goes in and then a response is given to the committee. That a working engagement, even over days, Because if the IEC and the state law advisor can reach a point where they see the faults with the bill, or alternatively, civil society is convinced by the quality of the arguments raised on the other side. If we have an engagement like that, and there's always the possibility that those who assert the validity of this bill convince those of us who assert the invalidity of the bill. We need an objective exchange, a working meeting, thrashing it out, a to and fro. Sorry, I know I'm belaboring the point. But if we were to have that kind of heavy-duty engagement, at least then we would probably be able to reach some form of consensus and understanding which could inform the parliamentary process. Although they likely do not have to, the NCOP could then call for submissions and presentations.
I think we may have lost Mike there, but I hope it's brief insofar as that's concerned. So I think clearly there's a lot of work to be done from all sort of stakeholders, and part of the work we're doing in conjunction with the likes of Rivonia Circle, the likes of My Vote Counts, is to try and create mechanisms for communities to have a voice in this whole process. We recognize that we occupy a specifically advantaged space as civil society, where we have the means and the ability to work through and read a lot of this legislation, to understand and dissect a lot of this legislation. And so part of our work then is to try and ensure that we simplify the language, we simplify the processes so that communities themselves don't feel left out. And part of the call that I hear being made is firstly that MPs themselves, we need to try and engage our MPs. There's a sense that we have members of parliament that don't necessarily engage with their legislated constituencies as often as they should. So insofar as engaging with the legislative constituencies, members of parliament ought to have constituency days. We know that they have these constituency days because then supposedly they go out and they are no longer doing the work of parliament ordinarily. And in doing so, they are meant to be in communities and conducting a sort of grassroots engagement. And if you were to ask very many community members, you'd hear that they don't even know where their constituency office is, and they don't know the MP that's allocated to that constituency. And so perhaps part of this realignment of the electoral space will help us in better understanding what constituencies actually mean. I hear Mike is back, and Mike, welcome back. We recognize that Durban/eThekwini is having a lot of difficulties when it comes to electricity, beyond the flooding, beyond the maladministration that we experienced in the previous administration. Of course, we have quite a number of other challenges, and of course, welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. Essentially, in a collaborative effort, I'm proposing that we get the relevant parties, even as the parliamentary processes proceed. We have no disrespect for that process, but we get the people who are concerned and knowledgeable on this topic in a solid working meeting, and we thrash out the concerns, the sort of discrepancies that are alleged, the distortion of proportionality. This can all be shown. It can all be worked out objectively. And perhaps then at the NCOP or the presidency, the findings can be presented, and a cooperative, collaborative system or solution can be obtained even at the last minute before the signing of the bill. I look at the ballot box. The ballot box, if I may use the term in democratic and electoral terms, the ballot box is a sacred moment. Each one of us, as we stand in that ballot box, has equal value in this country, regardless of our status, our background, our wealth. the whatever job we have equal value in the ballot box. And we must never lose the sense of the priority that at that one point, each voter is of the same worth. And if we play with the electoral system, if we jiggle the formulas, if we do recalculations, we are disturbing the value of votes. Now, we can debate the terminology and wasted votes or not, and there's disproportionality in the existing system. We can hammer all of those arguments out. But the problem is it's been 2 one-way conversations up to now. This hasn't been an engagement, a backwards and forwards engagement. If the bill does get signed, though, we are going to need a consolidated civil society effort, and this is not cheap and it's not easy. And the matters are not easy to explain. So we're going to need to get an effort going to the Constitutional Court. This is not to have a conflict. This is not to have a fight for power. This is civil society and concerned citizens saying, we need our electoral system to be better. And if I may go into the longer term, we are making the claim this system cannot work. We're going to have to reach a point where we say, okay, if this doesn't work, what is the best system? We are going to have to begin the process of engagement on electoral reform afresh. Debate the proposals, debate the alternate solutions. Somehow we have to make the best of the 2024 election. And it's difficult to predict how that will go out. And again, in a collaborative, cooperative way, as loyal citizens, as South Africans who want the best for our country, this isn't about politics. Or let's say it mustn't become about politics. It must become about our democracy and how we run our democracy. So we need to get through 2024 the best way we can. And then we need a proper system that engages everybody in the country ahead of the 2029 elections.
Much for your inputs, and I think that's an amazing space if we're all comfortable and have no further input at this time to try and round up and close off our engagement. Of course, we are hosting this platform in partnership with the Rivonia Circle, and our colleagues at Rivonia Circle have entrusted us with the opportunity to sort of anchor the discussions as DDP. And when I did my introductory remarks, part of what we were hoping to say is that as part of the work of civil society, and when we talk about the electoral cycle and civic education, all of those things don't start and end at an election themselves. And so when we talk about engaging with your MPs, engaging with your local council, engaging with your politically elected representatives, that work is an act of service to your country. It's a civic act. It's about remaining constantly vigilant of the fact that all of the gains of democracy and the ways in which we are represented require us to be involved, require us to be active and to participate quite actively in the system in order for there to be genuine transparency and accountability. And so when we talk about electoral reform, it's also about sort of increasing the ability of citizens' voices to be heard at all levels. Perhaps maybe a final minute from the Tlogonolo and a final minute from Mike before I conclude and give thanks to all of the stakeholders that put this engagement together.
Thanks, Pa. A parting shot from me would be the support from the public as we engage with this bill. It's at a very advanced stage, but we still do believe that there is quite some opportunities for intervention, as I had mentioned, the National Assembly, the NCOP, as well as the President. We are available in terms of sharing information and following on our socials just to sort of get a sense of what we are going to do. We're still going to have some workshops in Durban and Cape Town, so people can follow our pages just to see where we'll be and the information that we will be sharing. So that's pretty much what we'll be doing, and then hoping for the best come the 10th of December.
Thank you. Mike, your final shot?
Well, it would be really great if more people speak up, and if we can get some more engagement from the media. There are some journalists who have been covering this with great sort of accuracy and determination, but it would be great if we could get more platform to explore the details. The fairness of a vote is something that we can never, ever throw away or lose sight of. And it would be great if we could have conversations about what we aspire to with electoral reform and about the importance of elections in the whole democracy and the importance of getting elections right. So if we could have more sort of detailed focus on those areas, I believe it would help to get a proper national conversation going. Whenever other countries change their electoral systems, there are wide-ranging public debates about what is the best system, what do we prefer, what works well. And in essence, as South Africa, following a court judgment, a narrow court judgment, we need to be having these very broad conversations. What kind of electoral system expresses who we are as a country?
Much to yourself for your commitment to the process. I think having known you for quite a few years and your work in elections analysis, particularly work that has been unpaid and generally unthanked, it's important to have stakeholders like yourself who have a vested interest in not just sort of the broader free and fair title that we generally as election observer organizations sometimes come into the space with, but that you are interested in the mechanics of that process, whether it eventually leads to a just result, whether it eventually leads to a just seat allocation. And you've in the past been able to identify political parties who themselves were not as aware as they ought to have been, that they might have been losing certain seats or unjustly gaining certain seats in some of the more local as well as even national, provincial and national conversations. So we thank you very much for your commitment to the process. And of course, Mike has set up a blog site, electionsmatters.org.za, where he will provide a repository of information that speaks to both his presentation, or rather his submission to Parliament, as well as the various work that needs to be undertaken in relation to that. My Vote Counts and DDP will, on the 2nd of November, be hosting an engagement. The second that My Vote Counts will be hosting. It's called the People's Hearing, and we'll be talking through some of these matters in person. We'll be at the station venue, which is at the Glenridge Church in Durban, which is next to the bus station, which is why I guess they call it the station, but it's quite nice. And we hope to be able to see as many of you who are based in Durban to be a part of that space as well. Of course, we'll be streaming some of these as well on Facebook, as well as potentially YouTube. A link has just been shared to you, which is a link that provides another repository of information from the Defend Our Democracy campaign, as well as the stakeholders that they have amassed in order to try and work on this campaign as well. And so we hope that you are able to access and utilize all of the information that's available to you. Call your MPs, call your representatives, make sure that you have a voice in this space. Go on Twitter, go on Facebook, speak out as much as possible about this specific instance, because if we don't get it right, as Mike says, we are sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis. And so we don't want to be stuck in a space where we're having to repair things. The work of repairing, as you would have seen with the work of building this democracy, takes a long time. And that's time that we don't have, unfortunately, especially if we want to continue to enjoy the fruits of our democracy. From the Democracy Driven Program, the Executive Director, Dr. Paul Kariuki, our board, as well as our funders, from My Vote Counts, from Mike Atkins, as well as from Rivonia Circle, who are the key drivers of this specific webinar. We do thank you very much for your participation and your time. A link to the YouTube session will be available immediately after the post, so you can go and check on the Mail and Guardian page, and you'll be able to have access to it should you want to refer back. As Mike and Hlokonolo's information on the PowerPoints themselves were quite insightful, so you might want to get a refresher. Of course, as I've said, there are already repositories that are going to be sent through within due course. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians? Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians?" The Mail and Guardian, if you really want to know.